there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Conor Grace Cocon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're going to be continuing with our Disney series, and in today's video we're going to be covering none other than Jungle Book from 1967. So if you like what you've seen already, don't forget obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to check out our huge playlist of all the different Disney films up until this point. And don't forget, obviously, we're going to cover many more in the future as well. And then also we're going to be moving on to other directors as well. So definitely stay tuned for this channel. It's not going anywhere. It's got a whole lot more to cover. But for those of you who have seen this channel already and know what we're all about, apologies for this. You're just going to have to skip over what we're about to say, because what we're going to say is about the 6 different steps that we have. So we have the story of the story, you have the story of the creator, the story of the studio, the themes and the history, the legacy, and any notable lines and notable effects within the film. So buckle up, and without further ado, we're going to dive straight now into the story of the story. So the story of Jungle Book comes originally from Rudyard Kipling's 1894 novel, which was called The Jungle Book. And then a few years later, he also did the second Jungle Book. However, the stories within these are very different from what you see in the film. So we're going to talk about that in greater detail a bit later. But for now, we're going to dive into the plot of the Jungle Book. So our story starts out with Bagheera, who's strolling through the jungle, and then one day he comes across a man cub in a basket. So he takes the man cub to a pack of wolves, as you do. And so with these pack of wolves, what they do is they take Mowgli in and they raise him as one of their own. One night at Council Rock, the wolves meet to discuss the return of Shere Khan the tiger, who has sworn to kill man. And so he's going to kill Mowgli to stop him from becoming a hunter who can use a gun and will use fire. So the pack leader, Akela, he tells Rama, who's Mowgli's adopted father, that the boy must be taken back to the man village. So Bagheera at this point, he jumps in and he says that he is going to take him. So Mowgli obviously is not very strong and he can't climb trees, so Bagheera helps him up. But before long, he ends up meeting Kaa the snake, who hypnotizes Mowgli and tries to eat him, before Bagheera ends up saving him. The next morning, they're woken by Colonel Hati, so he's in charge of a bunch of elephants, and they march through, and although he tries his best, Mowgli isn't accepted into their patrol either, because obviously he's not an elephant. Now this is where they end up bumping into Baloo, who's this crazy hippie bear who's singing about doobies and the bare necessities of life, and this is where Mowgli ends up chilling with him, until he ends up being kidnapped by some monkeys. And the monkeys take him to their king, King Louie, who offers him a place in the jungle if Mowgli teaches him the secret to making fire. Now Bagheera and Baloo come to rescue him, and Baloo is dressed up as a monkey, and obviously he just gets caught up in the swinging groove, but eventually they end up escaping and they leave King Louie in the rubble. So now both Bagheera and Baloo have black eyes, and Bagheera warns Baloo to take Mowgli back to the man village. But when he tries, Mowgli runs off. Now as they get Colonel Hati to go on the search for the boy, this is where Shere Khan creeps in, and this is where he overhears their plan, and so he now goes on a mission to go and find Mowgli before the others do. So Mowgli is obviously strolling about, and this is where he ends up being caught by Kaa through hypnosis. But Shere Khan comes along looking for the boy, and this serves as a distraction which allows Mowgli to escape from Kaa's clutches. Now, obviously Mowgli is alone, he doesn't have any friends, and so he ends up befriending some vultures, and while they're singing, Shere Khan comes to try and kill the boy. Now Baloo comes through to try and save him, and he's almost killed in the process, and it's only a lightning bolt that starts a fire that saves them, as Mowgli ties a burning bush to Shere Khan's tail, and this is where the tiger ends up running away, and we never hear from him again. So now Baloo ends up rising again from the dead after Bagheera says some kind words about him, and then just as they think that everything's all back to normal, they stroll across the man village, and this is where Mowgli ends up simping really hard for this girl who's just fetching water. So he leaves his friends, and this is how the film ends, and it ends, I guess, kind of happily ever after. It depends on how you look at it, but yeah, so that's the end of the film at any rate. So that explains the story of the story, and now we have to talk about the story, the creative process that went into the making of this film. So that's what we're going to be looking at now. So as we've said, the story is obviously based off of the original book by Rudyard Kipling, And Kipling wrote the book because he was very much influenced by the stories of India. So he was born and raised in the British Raj at the time of like the British Empire there, and he was really fascinated by Indian culture and by Indian tales. So he took influences from these and created stories of his own. However, the thing is that Disney decided that he was going to do this, and he decided he was going to do this on the behest of Bill Peet. So Bill Peet, as we said, he was the one who wrote the script for The Sword and the Stone. But just before he ended up doing this, Bill Peet kind of convinced Disney that for the animators' sake, for the sake of the animation department, that they should make a film which is wholly centered on animals. So that was something which Disney was really excited by, but he decided that he wasn't going to stick too closely to the original books, and instead was going to go off of the 1942 film, which was done by Alexander Korda. So it took almost 10 years to win the kind of legal rights for this book, but eventually he ended up doing this. And this is where work began on making the film. However, there ended up being lots of disagreements between Walt Disney and Bill Peet, and that was mainly because, Bill Peet, he wanted to stick very closely to the actual original story. But Disney was like, it's a little bit too dark. There's lots of like very confusing kind of like meandering things. If you ever read The Jungle Book, highly recommend it. But you will see within it, it's like, it kind of goes all over the place, and also there's characters within like some of the Jungle Book stories which aren't even based in the jungle, they're not even in India, right? There's like one within the Arctic. It's all very confusing. But anyway, so that's why he kind of decided not to stick too close to the script. So then in January of 1964, Bill Peet ended up quitting, right? So the next writer they got, which was Larry Clemens, he was basically brought in by Disney, and Disney said, whatever you do, don't read the book. Now, he ended up obviously reading the book, and he kind of came to the same conclusion that Disney came to, which was that it was very difficult to create a narrative of a story through this. So instead, what Clemens did is he decided that the story was going to be character-based. Because while the original stories were kind of in the same light as Aesop's fables, so it's kind of anthropomorphizing the animals to make them a bit more human-like, so that we as humans can learn from them. Instead, it was going to just be more focused on the story and with the characters driving the story. And also as well, Clemens, he's the one who came up with the innovation of having a girl that Mowgli ends up simping hard over, right? And that was the reason that was given for him deciding to stay in the man village as opposed to like being in the jungle. So that little bit was put in for that purpose, right? So the thing to kind of note with this though is that this film was the first film that Disney had been really actively involved in since Sleeping Beauty. So like we said in that video in 1959, that film was meant to be his masterpiece. And so after that, when you had 101 Dalmatians and The Sword and the Stone, he kind of was like, okay, we'll just, I'll put my name on it, but I'm kind of just not going to get involved here because that was too much headache. So this was the first time since then that he'd got really involved in the actual making of the film. And when he was in the studio, he actually acted out every single role within this, which is something which he hadn't done since all the way back at the time of making Snow White. So it's quite fitting, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but in his first film, he ended up acting out all the roles, and in his last film, he ended up doing the same thing. So animation began in 1965, and what was quite unique about this film, as opposed to all the ones that had been beforehand, is that instead of animators being assigned specific characters to work on, instead for this, they would be given whole scenes to kind of work on, right? And they used a xerography, which is what we've described in more detail in the 101 Dalmatians. So this is just basically printing the images and stuff, so it ends up being quite streamlined of a process. Now, the casting for this was absolutely huge. And the reason why Disney did this is purposeful, right? Because he wanted, like we said, for it to be character-driven and character-focused. So that's why they have some really, really big names in this, like in terms of for the casting, it's absolutely brilliant. So we're going to start off just with the people who haven't been in any other Disney films, right? So we're going to start off with Mowgli, and he is voiced by Bruce Reifferman. So he is the son of the director of this, which is Wolfgang Reifferman. And Bruce, he is also actually the voice of Christopher Robin in the Winnie the Pooh series. So just a little bit of trivia with regard to that. Next, you have Phil Harris, and he is the voice of Baloo. And he's also going to appear as the voice of Thomas O'Malley in The Aristocats, and also of Little John in Robin Hood. Next, you have George Sanders. So he is the voice of Shere Khan. So he appeared in The Falcon, which is a bunch of like classic detective films from about like the 1940s, 1950s. And actually, Shere Khan is actually based off of George Sanders' physiognomy. So that's something kind of quite interesting in terms of like how he talks and how he like moves and stuff, right? Is actually based off of George Sanders' actual character. Then next you have Clint Howard. So he is the voice of Roo in the Winnie the Pooh series. And also when you watch The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, right? You know, like the really annoying person who like is kind of a sideman to the mayor. Yeah, that's actually him. So obviously he's a bit more grown up then, right? But as a child, he did the voice of Colonel Harty's son. And next, we're going to talk about all the many, many different voice actors who appeared in many different Disney films, which we've already covered. So you had Sebastian Colbert, and he is the voice of Bagheera. You have Sterling Holloway, and he's the voice of Car. You have Verna Felton, and she is the voice of one of the elephants. And also as well, this was actually her very last film because she died in 1966. And then you have J. Pat O'Malley, and he's the voice of Colonel Harty. And finally, you have Ben Wright, and he is the voice of Rama, who is the adopted father of Mowgli. And then, of course, we have to talk about my favourite swing artist of all time, Louis Prima, who is the voice of King Louis. And actually, I really recommend that you watch this video, which explains how he was casted and how him and his band came together to make such a swinging scene, right? With regard to the I Wanna Be Like You song, right? Absolutely brilliant. You'll learn so much about him, and also as well, just listen to many of his other songs, right? It's absolutely brilliant guy. And I'm going to talk about him a little bit later on when we talk about the legacy, but yeah, just bear that in mind for now. So anyway, that kind of covers the casting, and therefore that covers the story of the studio. But now we have to talk about the themes and the history of the film. So the main themes that kind of like run throughout Kipling's Jungle Book series is to do with abandonment followed by fostering. So Mowgli many times ends up being abandoned, but then he ends up being fostered by kind of a father figure of some sort, right? He ends up kind of trying to copy different things and trying to be more like different things. And so that's kind of a theme that kind of goes throughout the thing. And also as well, there's the kind of very interesting look at man versus nature. So at the time when Kipling was writing this, a lot of things were very kind of Darwinian, right? So it's this idea of the struggle of life, yeah, right? You know, the survival of the fittest. But Kipling kind of looked at it in a more ancient way in terms of Aesop's fables. And so, like we said, he kind of anthropomorphizes the animals. So it's a way for humans to learn how to be a man through looking at animals, right? So that's kind of a recurring theme which is throughout the film. And then also as well, because it's the 1960s, right? There's many different things which, if it had been done maybe 10 years before, it just wouldn't have had the same kind of vibe to it at all. And so obviously you can hear like the great influence of like swing music, and then also as well you're seeing a lot of this kind of counterculture kind of like 60s vibe to it, right? So you got Baloo talking about doobies and stuff, and he's a very chilled out hippie. But then also as well you've got the vultures, and if you notice why the vultures look a particular kind of way, that's because originally they were actually going to cast the Beatles to do the vultures, right? However, John Lennon at the last moment, he kind of was like, no, I don't want to be in any animated films. Although he'd been in like other like films to do like Beatles and stuff, yeah, right, like well, they all had. It was a thing where he was like, no, I don't want to do that. So instead they got some other band that I'd never heard of and no one ever has really heard of, and they make up like the kind of like British invasion, so-called, yeah. So in the early 60s you had lots of people coming from Britain making it big in America and stuff. So this was one of the many bands that did that, but yeah, their name's on screen now, but I can't remember them at all. So that covers the themes and the history. And now we're going to be talking about the legacy of the film. And the legacy of it is absolutely huge, right? In my opinion, it's like absolute favourite Disney film. It's just so enjoyable to watch. Like you never have like a bored moment in it. There's so many great lines in it, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And box office really speaks for itself. And the reason for that is because it cost just $4 million to make, so it's relatively low budget as Disney films went. But it made 11.5 million by 1968 alone, and by 1970 it made $13 million. And worldwide it made $23.8 million at the box office. So when you actually add up all of the kind of re-releases and things that they've done over the many years, internationally, it has made $671 million when adjusted for inflation or 2018 standards, right? So that's really huge. You can see why it's just such a popular film. And also as well, it was very sadly Disney's last film, because like we said in like our very first video when we looked at his biography, he was a really strong chain smoker, and as a result of that, he ended up getting cancer and he ended up dying, sadly, right? So he's only about 65 years old at the time when he died, and he died 10 months before this film was actually released. So it's really poetic and beautiful that the casting is so great. Like, it's just the huge legacy of all the different people who'd been in his many different films and made them so great that they'd all kind of come together. And he had put so much energy into this, and it's sad that he wasn't necessarily able to see like the kind of like end result. But still, yeah, absolutely great film. And sadly, the legacy of it has been ruined by Disney's inheritors, let's just say. So the people who run Disney now are idiots, and they have bowed to pressures, right? So now in like 2019, 2021, a bunch of people are now complaining, a bunch of snowflakes, I should say, complaining that King Louis is racist. Why is he racist? Because it's apparently meant to be African American, even though Louis Prima, like, he spoke like that, that's how he acted. Like, he was just being Louis Prima. So it kind of, I don't know, like, kind of like people nowadays are so devoid from any kind of like historical. Anyway, we've gone a long rant about that, but you're not here to hear that. But that's just something to let you know the legacy of it. Nowadays, people have taken a very beautiful film and have somehow been able to find some sort of problem with it. Anyway, that kind of covers the legacy of it. And now talk about the notable lines and notable effects. In terms of notable effects, there's some interesting shots at times, but a lot of it is quite plain, and obviously that's quite a low budget film. And like we said, the story is more kind of character driven, and that's probably why they didn't focus so much on like the kind of special effects or special angles, etc. It's a very basic kind of film as it goes, but still it has many notable lines. So first of all, you have this.
Well, it's a doobity-doo. Yes, it's a doobity-doo. I mean a doobie-doobie-doobie-doobie-doobie-doo.
And you have this.
Why, you flat-nosed, little-eyed, flaky freak, take your flea-picking hands off of my car.
And you have this.
They ambushed me. Thousands of them. I jabbed with my left, then I swung with the right. What happened to Mowgli? Like I told you, them mangy monkeys carried him off.
And you have this.
Birds of a feather should flock together. You wouldn't marry a panther, would you? I don't know. Come to think of it, no panther ever asked me.
And you have this.
Picking on that poor little helpless boy. Oh, yes. Poor little helpless boy.
And also you have this.
She did that on purpose. He's hooked.
So as you can see, it's an absolutely brilliant film. If you haven't seen it already, I don't know what you've been doing, because it came out in 1967. If you grew up and didn't have a childhood, you just didn't grow up, okay? Right, like, you need to go and watch this film. And even if you have seen it before, go and like watch it again, yeah, and actually experience these films as adults. Don't just have like a kind of view of it and stuff, because even as I do the research for these videos, I watch it again and go, oh snap, I didn't see that and I didn't notice that, and oh okay, that joke there, I understand now, etc. So that's what I really highly recommend. Don't just look at it as it's a kid's film. It's really great. And yeah, that kind of sums it up. Although I've forgotten to they were talking about the songs. So as we've said before, the songs were done by the Sherman Brothers, but also the song of Bare Necessities. Yeah, this was done by Terry Gilkinson. I think I pronounced his name properly. So yeah, he was the one who made the Bare Necessities, and in my opinion, that's just absolutely brilliant song. So yeah, it's a brilliant film. And yeah, the next film is going to be The Aristocats from 1970. So Walt Disney had a part to play in that, although obviously he didn't like live to kind of like see that be released, obviously. And I think moving forward, yeah, I'm going to be going, even though it's like after his death and originally planned during this series, I'll just be focused on kind of directors or in Disney's case, he's a producer. But I think I'm going to continue with this kind of strain of looking at Disney films, but I'm probably going to cap out sometime in the modern era. Maybe I might do like big films like Frozen in the distant future. But anyway, enough being said, and don't forget, obviously, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and obviously hit the bell button so you stay notified, and also check out our many other videos we've done up to this point, and stay tuned for many more. But yeah, in the meantime, have a great day, and bye.